Hello, my History 289 students. This is Professor Donald Earl Collins talking to you for week 8. We've made it. We're at the end of the semester. We made it through week 6 and 7 talking about Enola Gay and the whole notion of revisionist history. And unfortunately, most of you thought that revisionist history is literally a school of thought within the profession, which it's not. It's just part of what historians do, which is envisioning, revising, um, challenging old ways of looking at a particular historical event or trend or patterns or what or interpretations and whatnot. We're in a entire school of thought or historiography, right? And week 7 was about the amorphous terms of post-structuralism and postmodernism, and how some of you um, kind of went into different directions about what those things mean. It's perfectly okay if you didn't get those terms entirely, partly because these are really the kinds of things that you should be studying if you were going to graduate school, taking a graduate level historical methods class and earning a master's degree or even a doctorate in the field. I didn't learn about post-structuralism and postmodernism, quite frankly, until my first year of graduate school, and didn't take a full course on them until my third year of graduate school. So and I was in the doctoral program by then. So just to give you some idea. Although I find it a little disturbing that some of you continue to call women in the profession females. They're women. They're adults. They write. They're women. They're calling them females is extremely generic and can be potentially offensive. So just as an aside, I understand most of you are guys in the course and you're used to calling women females, but professionally speaking, these people have doctorates. They've been doing this work for quite some time. It's okay to call them women, right? There's nothing offensive about that term. And there's nothing offensive about calling men men, by the way, either. So, anyway, just getting those things aside. One quick note. You have a week 8 paper that's due at the end of week 8, your final assessment paper that sort of brings all these approaches of schools of thought together. So you just need to review every school of thought that we've learned since the analysis school from week 1 and work your way forward to the present. Today, though, what I'm mostly going to talk about with you is the whole idea of how do you write and how do you write as a historian, how do you tell stories as a historian, how do you incorporate all the stuff that we have learned over the last 7 weeks and then some. You haven't learned anything, everything. What you've learned so far is hardly exhaustive of the total number of approaches and methodologies and ways of dealing with history that historians have to use. In any case, you have the recording, an hour and a half presentation and Q&A with William Cronin, who was, I think, at one point the president of the American Historical Association, but at the very least he was giving a keynote address at the AHA meeting, annual meeting in January of 2013, talking about the whole notion of storytelling. And here's the context for this. This is something I have struggled with my entire career, both within academia and outside academia, particularly as a freelance writer. And that is this whole, most historians, if you didn't know this prior to week 7, I'm pretty sure you noticed in your readings of post-structuralism and postmodernism from week 7, that the writers you read wrote in highly theorized and very, very granular and dense sorts of ways, which is a nice way of saying that they're not very good writers, right? They don't know how to write. You know, they don't know how to tell a story. They're so busy with theory and philosophical arguments and using terms that you have to look up every sentence, right? That you don't really fully grasp what it is that they're trying to say until you mull it over. And then you mull it over and chew on it and ruminate and chew on it and ruminate some more until you finally sort of got it, and you might not quite get it even after doing all of that. It's the one thing in my profession as a historian that I struggle with, pretty much have struggled with since I was in graduate school. This idea of how can you be a good historian, do good interpretation, do good analysis, and then write it in a way where people can read it and enjoy reading it. Too often, people in the profession only write for each other because that's all they know how to do. They think that because they wrote something down, they provided citations and sources, and that other colleagues are like, "This is good, this is wonderful," that they're good writers, and quite frankly, they're not. Right? There's a world of difference between reading someone who's a really good writer, like say James Baldwin, right, the late James Baldwin, or reading someone like say who's a good journalist, like Nicole Hannah Jones, if for those of you who may or may not be familiar with her work, or any number of William Roden, who's in sports, who does sports writing, or any number of other people. David McCullough is a pretty good writer, despite the fact that he's lifted from his students in the past. Right, he's more than a pretty good writer. He's a very good writer, actually. Right, William Cronin himself is a good writer. One of the best books I've ever read as a graduate student was William Cronin's book Nature's Metropolis, which is the story of Chicago's development in the middle of so-called wilderness in the area around off the southwestern end of Lake Michigan, and how that city develops into the metropolis that it becomes by the end of the 19th century. Right, the period of time that covers is roughly 1800 to 1893, the World's Exposition when it was held there in 1893, so it covers about 100 years, right? But he tells a story, and he talks about the process of how he goes about telling stories as part of this long speech that he gives. Admonishing historians from not wanting to do storytelling, which is kind of it's called history. It's not called his theory. It's his story, which means you have some sort of story to tell. Um, but it's something that as a historian, that I know I'm not the only one who struggles with this, but I know a lot of people do struggle with this fact. And unfortunately, the profession is tuned in such a way to um, almost admonish historians from writing in a way for everyday, ordinary Americans, ordinary people who read their work to actually get it, right? In other words, when you write an article for publication with a scholarly journal, the only people who should truly appreciate what you've written are either graduate students who you make read the thing, or other colleagues in your subfield. So if you write for, say, African American history, those are the people who are going to read it. Asian American historians are not going to read your work. Native American historians are not going to read your work. European historians are not going to read your work. Women historians probably aren't going to read your work. Maybe black women's historians will read your work, right? So that's how granular and that's how specific you can get in the profession. But the result of that is no one sharpens their writing skills. No one spends time learning techniques from narrative nonfiction or creative writing. No one knows the skill or art of interviewing and then integrating interviews in a storytelling sort of way. Those are the kinds of things that journalists learn. Those certainly are the kinds of things that writers who write outside of the profession of history and outside academia learn. The idea of being able to piece together a story and to be able to do it while still using methods. You can still do this and use methods. You can still do this and use interpretations and approaches, whether it's critical race theory, which is for me, or in social history, which is for me, or whether it's something like, Marxist theory. You can do it. It's just extremely hard to do. People aren't, I mean, being a good writer, and by being a good writer, meaning a writer that entertains as much as they educate, a writer that is able to show passion and thoughtfulness, to basically break down theory while simultaneously also taking you step by step through someone or some groups or some nation's story, and being able to do that in a way where you are learning all along the way, but at the same time you're turning page after page going, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next, kind of thing. That's not how most historians write, and unfortunately the profession has gotten so far away from that we do not train historians how to write well. We simply do not do it. We just don't. And Cronin spends a considerable time of his recording talking about the fact that the profession doesn't do a very good job. In fact, I would argue that we do a piss poor job, actually, of training historians how to be good writers and good storytellers. We do. That's just me being honest about where we are as a profession. And it's not rewarded when you are able to do those things. Because tenure, becoming a professor that doesn't have to worry about losing their job from day to day, being on the tenure track, is dependent on your ability to publish articles that other people in the field find acceptable. And part of that acceptance is writing in a way that historians are actually trained to write, which is highly theoretical, highly interpretive, highly analytical, and it has to have the language and feel of being a PhD historian, which means that it can't be well understood by the public. It can't be written in what's known as a journalistic style, and using narrative nonfiction is a journalistic style. Being able to tell a story kind of is journalistic. Being able to break down interviews and simplify things so that everyday or ordinary people can get them is considered journalistic by many people in this field. This is actually not a settled issue at all, and it's actually where the profession is struggling right now in attracting more people into the profession and attracting more people from diverse backgrounds in the profession and attracting people in the profession who are good writers, right? Some of the best books I've read that have a historical angle are written by people who are not professional academic PhD historians. They're former journalists who are good writers. They're writers. They're people who've written fiction novels. They've written other kinds of books. They've written poetry. And so they're really good writers, and they just happen to decide to write something that has historical nature, and they're able to do it. There are other professions within humanities and social sciences who are able to do both, where you can mix both and do it fairly easily. Because history occupies both humanities and social sciences, it's literally in the middle of a battle over this kind of issue. And so, what I want you to be able to talk about during your discussion this week, as part of this, is really think about um, the different skill sets that it takes to be a good historian. And then think about the skill set that we don't spend a lot of time worrying about or working on, which is this whole area of actual writing, right? Actually how to put together cogent, concise, coherent sentences that also are compelling, that also cause you to feel something, right? Not just the event itself, but literally the emotion that people might have actually had during that event. That kind of thing, right? Statistics can give you some sense of emotion, but and certainly description can, but putting it in a historicized way, in a story sort of format about what it must have been like to survive the Holocaust or survive slavery or survive, right, war, right? Those kinds of things. That's that's hard for most academic historians to do, and most of them shy away from those emotions because of the whole notion of objectivity, which we talked about in weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. So those are the kinds of things that you need to think through in terms of your discussion for this week, and also think through in terms of how you relate to the profession itself. I would argue that the way the profession is constructed right now, that being a good storyteller, a really good storyteller, and a really good writer is incompatible with everything else that's expected of historians these days. But I would also argue that the profession is ripe for change on this very topic because of the fact that so many people who aren't historians are winning book awards for the work that they're doing and making good money in the process of doing so, doing exactly what historians can't seem to be able to pull themselves up to do at this point. And so that's it for the course. This is my last recording, so thank you for your journey with me, and good luck.